this leads me right to the fourth choice, leads me right to creating community and belonging. And so for me on my journey, that was my fourth critical choice. My journey was linear in taking these choices because each one helped me and prepared me, expanded my ability to give and to get. And so the fourth one was to create community and belonging. When I was a little girl, I didn't belong anywhere. And in fact, my dad forced us to flee. I moved 12 times before I ever graduated high school, from town to town, school to school. And so finally, when I was in my very early 30s, I realized that I had created so much traditional professional success, which was like extraordinary anyways for me compared to where I came from. But what I realized is that I was friendly. I was friendly with everyone, but I was friends with no one. And my choice was to take an active, like intentionally create my community. And so I did. And so there's a little story there about the girls in the marathon group that I became a part of. Have you felt ever where you didn't belong? That you were in a space or a room or an environment or a situation where you're like, I don't really feel like I belong. Have you ever felt that?
I have, and I think going back to my undergraduate experience, something that I often tell people is that, so I'm ethnically Armenian, and that's been a big driving force in my life. I'm the descendant of Armenian genocide survivors who fled to the US a few generations ago. And for one, what that means is I grew up in a country that, for the majority of my life, didn't even recognize the Armenian genocide. So my history could not be taught in schools. And it was basically treated as this contentious issue that could be debated, right? And here I have like this familial past that I know existed. So it's really heartbreaking when people are like, did that actually happen? And there are definitely, scholars giving talks at different universities sometimes that are giving that more denialist perspective. And it's hard for someone like me to comprehend that. And just, I always question, like, oh, how are these universities allowing that? I mean, a lot of other very recognized tragedies that wouldn't be allowed, but sometimes there's a double standard when you're part of such a tiny ethnic group. But building off of that, when I was at Columbia, Columbia has a big focus on culture and multiculturalism. And again, we have that very highly international student body. So there's a lot of different groups dedicated to culture and identity where I get to campus and the Brazilian club has all these events, and there's all these different events for the vast majority of my peers. And I had known that there was an Armenian club, but it had kind of fallen inactive. There wasn't active programming. And I really, as I was trying to settle in and find community and get my footing, was like, what spaces are there for me on campus? Where do I belong here? And I just felt like something was missing. So in the end, there had been some people on this Armenian Club executive board. I really did my best to convince them to have active programming. The first 2 years of my undergraduate experience go by, and I'm unsuccessful in that as much as I'm trying and saying I'll help plan things. So eventually I say, can we do a formal election? Because over time it had just been passing on these rules, and I think overall people were using them for a resume line, unfortunately. So I asked for a formal election, and I actually go through the entire listserv of 80,000 Columbia student names. It's 80 people a page at the time. And I'm just looking, Armenians have very identifiable last names. We all have like the IAM, YAM ending. Obviously, there's some exceptions, but overall, 98% of Armenians I meet have that last name ending, like Kardashian, even though that might not be the best example.
Yeah.
So I'm going through this directory and I am literally just pulling emails as I go, doing control F for these last names. And I'm sending cold emails to people like, hey, I'm running for this. This is my vision for this club. Would really appreciate your support. And I would love for you to be involved. And I do all of that outreach. I'm very determined. I am selected as president, build this exec board around me. My vice president was one of my best friends to this day. And we just hit the ground running and just had all of these programming experiences. We had barbecues, we had trivia nights, and then we had more serious discussions and we had meetings with government officials. We met with the prime minister of Armenia, and I have a picture of him with us to this day. So it was just this amazing experience in self-advocacy and building this environment of belonging in a space where I really didn't know what there would be for me. I just made it happen. And to this day, a lot of my most formative experiences were in leading that club. And I made some of my best friends to this day through that club and through taking that initiative. Even though, again, when I get to campus, I'm like, oh, there's no real space for someone like me. And to that point, even the Multicultural Affairs Office, I remember, they post in commemoration of different big events in history and so on. And I'm like, okay, can we acknowledge the Armenian genocide? I just want this on like a Columbia social media page this year.
Mm-hmm.
You're posting about everything else that's recognized by the US.
Mm-hmm.
The response to me is that's too controversial, even recognizing this. So it's difficult sometimes, but to this day, Turkey doesn't recognize the genocide. So there's just a lot of geopolitical tension there.
The story that you just provided. So I usually ask, I ask people, what does it feel like not to belong? What does it feel like to belong? You and I have talked about this before, and I think you just articulated both of those things so beautifully. Then I ask, and I'm telling you this because I'm going to ask, because I'm going to make a point here, was there an action? Did someone help you through some micro action or moment to help you feel like you belonged? So that's usually my question, but I'm not asking you that. And here's why. Because you are the one that helped somebody else feel like they belonged. You sent an email. You control F'd so many people. And I 100% impacted every single one of those people, even if it was for like a microsecond where they felt a sense of belonging. You did that. And then you created even much more from that with the organization, the leadership, and all the initiatives and all that. But so often people say, well, what can I do? What can I do? Just do one little thing. Control F and send an email. So that's why I'm not going to ask you, because you are the example of taking action to help somebody feel like they belonged. I want to touch on community just for a minute, because there's so many communities. So I'm a big believer that community helps support and propel our journeys to enduring success. The Marathon Girls for me was my first community that I created, and this was like, oh, this is me. And we had shared identity and safety and belonging and all that stuff. And then since then, I've created and been a part of a whole bunch of communities. One of the things that your story about Harvard Law and your first year during Thanksgiving and your section not having a Thanksgiving plan, and that you went to go ask your other friend and fellow student, and you brought people to his section. The reason I want to point that out is because what I'm going to call that cross-pollinating communities. What I have found is that throughout my journey, I've created these really strong, or I've become a part of these really strong communities, but they're very disparate. I have my work community. I have my mom community. I have my church community. I have my workout community. And for whatever reason, none of them touch. And then I find that we don't grow as much as we could by introducing different people to these communities. And I feel like, again, you organically did that through saying to your friend, can I bring some people from my section to your section? And you cross-pollinate it. So that's my story. But I want to ask you, do you consciously think about that? How to bring people together that wouldn't necessarily meet?
I think often student leadership gives you a platform where that naturally happens because I believe in getting to know a lot of people. I would say that, like, compared to the average Harvard law student, I know much more of the grade, right?
Yeah.
Even as a first year, I went beyond my section. I started getting to know other sections very well. And then I also just dove into student leadership roles yet again because I know by being a student leader, by being on these different executive boards, I am being exposed to so many individuals who are unlike me, and it's a very valuable experience. So these student leadership roles have not only allowed me to have like direct impact through events, but they also allow me to get to know people in different grades, in different life, just different periods of their lives. I've been on the business club executive board for Harvard's business club for 3 years now. And my first year, I was so close with the third years on that club's board, and they're all practicing attorneys now. Same with when I was a Columbia undergrad, actually. I befriended numerous people at Columbia Law School at the time. And I was pre-law, but I think a lot of undergraduates, even if there's a law school attached, don't really take the extra steps to befriend law students. And some of those law students, I'm the first to be lawyer in my extended family, were just pivotal in telling me just early on, these are the things you need to do. And they've been in touch with me ever since, watching my journey. So again, full circle, but I think it is really important to cross-pollinate and just go beyond your immediate surroundings if there's opportunities.
Your entire DNA is, I'm going to leap forward to professional world. So you've already selected your law firm. We're not going to talk about it here, but like, you know, your path, you're going into big law. And I know, and this would be for a part 2 conversation as well, after you get settled, is you're going to practice law. And I also know, because I work with a ton of law firms, that you do, there is generating business. And I think some people get nervous about what that means, but you are the perfect example of having the DNA, which is it's relationships. What can you do to help somebody else? Who can you introduce? How can you give? And I think for my community, the younger associates that watch this and maybe, second, third year in their firms, accountants, lawyers, whatever, just remember this and listen to Danielle, because it's innate. It's just, can I introduce somebody to someone else? Can I give a little bit to somebody? How can I help somebody out? And it does not need to be more complicated than that. So I think that's a lesson too that you can provide to others that are in their professional path.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Choose and Become interview series. To check out more episodes, go to www.trishkendallspeaks/podcast, or go to any of your favorite podcast channels, including YouTube, under Trish Kendall Speaks, and you'll find this interview and more. Choose and become.